when Lynn and I are talking about clinical practice or therapy or examples, we never disagree. There is nothing we disagree about. Then as soon as she states her point of view in abstract terms, then I get all upset. So first I have to explain that. Okay. Back in 1954, I think it was. No, 52. So that's what? That's more than half a century ago. I joined a group of therapists. I was a philosophy student, but they said, yeah, that's interesting to have a philosopher. So I joined them, and I was in the practicum, and it was just a time when research findings were coming in. Research findings from a 3-year project, big thing. And Carl Rogers had predicted that the relationship would make a difference. The relationship would affect the outcome. We had a whole bunch of I just joined then. I was a green student. A bunch of outcome measures, all different kinds. And the research showed definitively that the relationship made no difference. So that was a great disappointment. But I do want to say, in my experience, somebody way back then tried to say that the relating is basic to what's going on in therapy. And I thought that too, but the research said no. So I went looking to see how had they measured this relational thing. Well, they measured it by classifying all the statements. And so there were statements talking about us, or the therapist, and they were classified relationship. And then there were statements about oneself and one's inner experience and all that, and they were classified not relationship. And how much relating there was going on made absolutely no difference. Well, I was in therapy at the time, and for me, that made perfect sense. I never talked about my therapist. I was much too shy to ever do that. Everybody called him by his first name, but I didn't. And I didn't call him anything else either. I just didn't. So I knew that when I walked in the door, before I walked across the room and sat down there, when I walked in the door, I was different. And that happened completely regularly. And so I thought, well, what I really want is I want to be like that when I'm not here, you know. So I said to myself, that's the relationship. And the statements aren't going to tell you anything about it. So from then on, for the next 20 years or so, I fought this battle in favor of relationships. Because at the time, and not many of you are old enough to remember that time, it was a time when psychology consisted entirely of individual differences. That's all they were interested in. Everything was individual. Everything was individual differences. Everything came out of the individual. If you had any relational stuff, it was projection. It was transference. And your doctor, you know, if you said to your analyst, Dr. Morrison, I love you, or Dr. Morrison, I'm mad at you, or anything like that, Dr. Morrison would say, that can't be. You don't really feel about me. It has to be your father or somebody else in your past. That was all that was permitted. And I had one client I had being a trainee who absolutely was driven crazy by that, because she loved Dr. Morrison, and she knew that she loved Dr. Morrison. She had never met anybody like that before, and Dr. Morrison could not stand it. So, again, in my own experience as a client, I knew that it's always both. It's always what's going on now, and the past is in there. If the past hadn't been the way it was, this wouldn't be going on this way now. The past is always there, and the present is always there too.